I have told this story backwards 1,000 times. That is the only way it makes sense, starting from the silence, working back toward the noise, and praying somewhere in the middle, you find the moment where it could have been stopped. You never do. But you keep looking. I have told it to colleagues, to investigators, to the two advisory counselors who came to Aswan personally to assess the site. I have told it to Kesterel, who asked to hear it even though she was present for most of it. I have told it to myself, lying awake in my laboratory, when the Vathorn Basin is dark and the crater is a shadow, and the glass floor catches what little light the moons provide. I have told it so many times that certain parts have worn smooth, like a stone handled too often, still accurate, still factual, but polished of the roughness that comes from encountering something for the first time. I am trying to restore the roughness now. I am trying to tell it the way it felt, not the way it sounds after 1,000 repetitions. The way it felt when each piece arrived separately, out of context, before the shape of the whole was visible. That is harder than it sounds. Memory is an archivist, and archivists smooth things out. We impose order on data that arrived in disorder. We construct sequences from events that did not feel sequential. We build the story backwards, which is, I suppose, why I keep telling it that way, because that is how I actually know it. Not forward, from the discovery to the consequences. Backwards, from the silence that followed the departure, working back toward the moment when an ordinary day became something else entirely. My name is Tonvel. I was senior archivist of the Sethari Collective's Deep Geology Division, stationed at Keth Terrell, the great subsurface archive carved into the mantle rock of our fourth colony world, Aswan. I had held the post for 61 years. In that time, I had cataloged 14,000 geological strata, classified 9 million mineral samples, and authored the definitive index of anomalous subsurface signatures across the collective's 17 settled worlds. I was, by any measure the collective respected, very good at my job. I say was because the job no longer exists. The archive no longer exists. Aswan, for all practical purposes, no longer exists as a place where the Sethari conduct business. What happened there took 11 hours. The evacuation, what there was of one, took 9. The thing that caused it had been asleep beneath us for 700 years, and not one of my 9 million samples, not one of my 14,000 classified strata, not one entry in the whole sprawling index had ever flagged it. I missed it. 61 years of careful, diligent, celebrated work, and I missed the most significant geological anomaly in the history of my species. Not because my instruments failed, not because the data was ambiguous, but because the thing buried beneath the Vathorn Basin was not a geological formation at all. It was something else. Something that should not have been there. Something that had been placed there deliberately 7 centuries ago by people who understood that the best place to hide an object of terrifying power is inside the body of a planet, beneath layers of stone and silence and institutional confidence. They hid it from us, and we, busy, diligent, thorough, we helped. Every stratum I cataloged above it was another blanket pulled over the truth. Every mineral sample I filed was another lock on the door. The collective's own geological archive, my life's work, had become the camouflage. I am telling you this from my laboratory. The same laboratory. In fact, I refuse to leave, even after the evacuation order. I sit at my desk, and on my desk is a cup of tea that has gone cold, and next to the tea is a spectrometer. And next to the spectrometer is the core sample that ended the Sethari Collective's 400-year monopoly on self-deception. The sample is 12 centimeters long and 8 centimeters in diameter. It is dark gray, threaded with veins of something that glints like metal but does not oxidize. It weighs 1.4 kilograms. Under standard spectral analysis, it reads as a laminate, layers of steel, titanium, chromium, and molybdenum, bonded in a pattern that is not natural, cannot be natural. No geological process in the known universe produces laminated chromium molybdenum alloy in alternating sheets with a tolerance of 0.03 millimeters. Core sample VB77-4 pulled from 2,340 meters below the Vathorn Basin floor. That depth puts it roughly 500 meters below the deepest cataloged stratum in the basin, Stratum Vale 12, a Hadean-era basalt shelf that I personally surveyed and classified as the geological basement of the region. Nothing below it. That was the entry in my index. Stratum Vale 12, terminal, basement confirmed, no further sampling required, no further sampling required. 5 words. I wrote them myself 30 years ago in my own hand in the definitive geological survey of the Vathorn Basin. 30 years of confidence. 30 years during which no drill went deeper, no probe went lower, because the senior archivist had determined that there was nothing left to find. I was wrong. The drill that pulled VB771 was not mine. It belonged to a junior surveyor named Kes Terrell, no relation to the archive, despite the name, who was conducting a routine calibration test on a new deep-bore unit. The unit was designed for 3,000-meter cores, and Kes Terrell needed a deep formation to calibrate it against. The Vathorn Basin was convenient. The Hadean basalt at 800 meters was a known benchmark. She drilled past it, through it, and kept going, not because she expected to find anything, but because the calibration protocol required testing at maximum depth. At 2,340 meters, the drill punched through the last layer of basalt and into something that was not rock. The bit skidded. The torque readings spiked. The drill whined, caught, and then, according to Kestrel's equipment log, the bit sheared clean off, not chipped, not worn, sheared as if it had struck a surface harder and smoother than anything the drill was designed to penetrate. She pulled the core. She ran it under her field spectrometer. She read the results 3 times. Then she brought it to me. "Senior archivist," she said. She was standing in my doorway, holding the sample in both hands, and I remember thinking she looked ill. "I found this at 2,340 meters, in the basin, below Vale 12. I set down my tea very carefully. "Below Vale 12, I repeated. The words did not make sense. Below Vale 12 was the mantle transition. Undifferentiated silicate melt. You could not drill through it because there was nothing to drill through. It was liquid, or near liquid, or at least plastic enough that no core sample could be extracted from it. That was the geological model. That was what my survey said. That was what I had taught every junior archivist who had passed through Keth Terrell in 30 years. Below Vale 12, she confirmed. And then she set the sample on my desk, next to my tea, and I saw the metal. It was not a mineral inclusion. It was not a natural formation. It was armor plate. I knew this immediately, the way you know that a sound in the dark is footsteps and not wind. Not because you can prove it, but because your body recognizes the pattern before your mind has finished analyzing it. Laminated, layered, machined to tolerances that nature does not achieve. Steel and titanium and chromium and molybdenum bonded in alternating sheets designed to absorb and distribute kinetic energy across a surface. Armor plate, at 2,340 meters below the surface of a planet where, according to every record in my archive, no armor had ever been built, tested, stored, or deployed. I ran the spectrometer myself 3 times. The readings did not change. Then I ran the density scanner, then the crystallographic analyzer, then every instrument on my desk, one after another, as if running enough tests would eventually produce a result I could file under a familiar category. None of them did. I am not a dramatic person. Archivists, as a rule, are not dramatic. We are methodical. We are careful. We derive our satisfaction from precision, from completeness, from the quiet pleasure of putting the right sample in the right drawer with the right label. I have never raised my voice in my laboratory. I have never thrown an instrument or cursed at a reading, or experienced what the younger archivists call a professional crisis. I experienced one that afternoon. Not outwardly, I sat perfectly still, as I always do, hands folded, posture correct, but inwardly, in the place where a scientist keeps the assumptions that make his work possible, I felt the ground shift. Not the literal ground, though that would come later. The metaphorical ground, the foundation, the bedrock conviction that the data in my archive was correct, that my 61 years of work had produced an accurate picture of the world beneath my feet, that when I wrote, "basement confirmed," no further sampling required, I was telling the truth. The sample was what it appeared to be. Manufactured metal, buried impossibly deep, impossibly old, and impossibly intact. The crystallographic analysis gave me the age, 700 years, plus or minus 40. The alloy had been manufactured, smelted, rolled, bonded, and shaped, approximately 700 years before I pulled it from the earth. I sat with that number for a long time. 700 years. The Sethari Collective is 9,400 years old. We have records going back to the founding of our first interstellar colony. Our archive is the most complete historical document in the known galaxy. 340 exabytes of indexed, cross-referenced, searchable data covering every significant event in Sethari civilization. 700 years ago, according to that archive, nothing happened on Aswan. The colony was established. The Vathorn Basin was surveyed, briefly, superficially, by a team that did not have deep-bore equipment. The basin was classified as geologically stable and scientifically unremarkable. Settlement began in the equatorial zone, 4,000 kilometers to the north. The basin was left alone. Nothing happened. Nothing was buried. No armor was manufactured. No structure was built. No event occurred that would explain the presence of laminated chromium molybdenum alloy 2, 340 meters below the surface of a planet that had been continuously inhabited for 7 centuries. The archive said nothing happened. The archive was lying. I know that now. I did not know it then. Then I simply sat in my laboratory with a cold cup of tea and a core sample that should not exist, and I felt the quiet, particular dread of a scientist who has discovered that his own data is incomplete. I filed a formal anomaly report, Form GEAR 17, Subsurface Anomalous Material Detection. I filed it at 1440 local time on a day that, at that point, was still ordinary. The form requires a preliminary classification. I wrote unidentified metallic formation, manufactured origin probable, depth inconsistent with known geological profile. Recommend expanded survey. I should have written, something is buried under the Vaythorn Basin, and it is not ours. But archivists do not write that way. We write in categories. We classify. We file. It is what we are good at, and it is what makes us blind. The expanded survey began 4 days later. I authorized it myself, the only authority I had left that mattered. 4 deep bore units, spaced at 500-meter intervals across the basin floor, drilling to 3,000 meters. Tess Terrell supervised the drilling. I supervised the analysis. Those 4 days were the strangest of my career. I went about my normal work. I have always been methodical, and disrupting a routine felt dangerous in a way I could not articulate. I cataloged samples. I updated the mineral index. I drank tea at my desk and answered correspondence from junior archivists at other stations, attended a quarterly review meeting via long-range communication relay, during which I provided a routine summary of the division's output for the past 6 months and did not mention core sample VB771. I also did not sleep. Or rather, I slept badly a few hours a night, waking repeatedly to a low vibration that I could not locate and could not measure. My instruments registered nothing, but I felt it. In my bones, in my teeth, in the base of my skull where old evolutionary instincts live. A pulse, a beat, patient and regular, like the sound of an enormous engine running somewhere far below, maintaining itself in the dark, counting the seconds until someone came. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was the ventilation system. I told myself I was experiencing the psychological effects of a professional shock, that my mind was pattern matching in overdrive, that the sensation was not real. I was wrong about that too. The first 3 cores came up as expected, basalt, basalt, and more basalt, all the way down to the Vale 12 boundary, and then, not mantle transition, not undifferentiated silicate melt, more metal, different compositions in different locations, but all manufactured, all laminated, all machined to the same inhuman tolerances. The 4th core, drilled at the geometric center of the basin, struck something at 1,800 meters that the drill could not penetrate at all. The bit did not shear. It simply stopped, as if it had reached the surface of something that regarded a diamond-tipped geological drill as a mild inconvenience. The torque readings went to maximum. The drill motor overheated. The entire rig had to be shut down and cooled for 6 hours before we could extract the bit. The bit was undamaged. Whatever it had struck had not broken the drill. It had simply refused to be drilled. I ordered a seismic survey, ground-penetrating sonar, deep frequency, the kind we use to map magma chambers and tectonic fault lines, the kind that can image solid structures through kilometers of rock. The results came back in 12 hours. I was in my laboratory when Kestorel brought them in. She set the printout on my desk without speaking, and I looked at it, and I understood immediately, completely, with the kind of certainty that does not require interpretation, what was buried under the Vaythorn Basin. It was a ship. The sonar image was rough, blurred by depth and interference, degraded by the density of the overburden, but the shape was unmistakable. A hull, elongated, tapered at both ends, wider amidships, with structures protruding from the dorsal and ventral surfaces that could only be weapons mounts or sensor arrays. The overall length, estimated from the sonar return, was 4,200 meters. I stared at the printout for a long time. Kestorel stood beside me, saying nothing. There is a particular quality of silence that occurs between 2 scientists who have just discovered something that invalidates both their careers, and it is not a comfortable silence. It is the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down, understanding that the fall has already begun, and that the only question is how long it takes to reach the bottom. 4.2 kilometers. I kept returning to that number. The mathematical implications alone were staggering. A manufactured object 4, 2 kilometers in length, requires an industrial base capable of producing at minimum several 100 million tons of processed alloy. It requires engineering precision sustained across a construction project of extraordinary scale. It requires a civilization, not a primitive one, not a species in its industrial infancy. A civilization that builds on a scale that makes the Sethari Collective's proudest achievements look like craft projects. And someone, some civilization with all that capability, all that power, had sent this object here, or it had come here on its own. And then it had been buried, and then it had been forgotten, and I had spent 30 years standing on top of it, filing rock samples and drinking tea, and believing that the deepest secret of the Vathorn Basin was a Hadean-era basalt shelf, buried under 800 meters of rock, in a basin that the Sithari Collective had classified as geologically unremarkable for 700 years. The largest warship in the Sithari fleet is the Orhan-class Dreadnought. We have 19 of them. They are 1.1 kilometers long. They are the most powerful vessels our civilization has produced in 9,400 years of spacefaring history, and they are our pride. And I had just found something 4 times their length, sleeping in the basement of a colony world. I called Korathsev, military liaison to the Keth Terrell Archive, a title that had always struck me as ceremonial. Korathsev was a mid-rank officer with a desk and a pension plan and the kind of career trajectory that peaks at competent. I had known him for 20 years. We played strategy games on rest days. He cheated. Small methodical cheats, the kind that were almost impossible to catch, and that he denied with such conviction I sometimes wondered if he believed them himself. I mention this because it seems relevant now, in retrospect, to how the Sithari Collective operates. We are a species of small, methodical cheats who convince ourselves we have done nothing wrong. Korathsev, I said, I need you to come to my laboratory. Is it urgent? Tonvel? I have a review. A 4.2-kilometer object is buried under the Vathorn Basin. It is shaped like a warship. It is not ours. Come now. The line was silent for 4 seconds. Then, I'll be there in 10 minutes. He arrived in 7. He was not a man who ran. His knees were bad. And he was proud, and running implied panic. And Korathsev did not do panic in visible ways. But he walked fast. I could tell from the sound of his footsteps in the corridor, the rhythm slightly off, slightly urgent, like a man who is not running but is not running either. He came in. He looked at the sonar printout. He looked at core sample VB7714. He looked at me. Then he did something I had never seen him do in 20 years of acquaintance. He locked the laboratory door, sat down across from me, and began speaking in a voice so low I had to lean forward to hear him. You need to stop, he said. Right now. File a redaction order on the anomaly report. Seal the core samples, recall the drilling teams, and classify the sonar data as military sensitive. Do it now before anyone else sees this. Korathsev, I said. What is buried under the basin? I don't know, he said. But his hands were shaking. And I had known him for 20 years. And I knew when he was lying, the same way I knew the difference between a mineral inclusion and manufactured armor plate. His body recognized the truth before his words caught up. You know something, I said. I know rumors, he said. Old ones. From the deep archives, the ones above my clearance level. I heard them when I was a junior officer, from a superior who drank too much and talked too freely and was quietly retired 6 months later. Stories about something the collective buried a long time ago. Something that was not ours. Something we took from someone else. Took from whom? He looked at me for a very long time. Then he said a word I had never heard before. A word that was not in any archive I had access to. Not in any database, not in any index or catalog or record in the entire 340 exabyte span of Sethari institutional memory. Humans, he said. I did not recognize the word. I told him so. It sounded like a classification, a genus perhaps, or a taxonomic subcategory, but it was not in any index I maintained, and my indices were comprehensive. I had cross-referenced 44 alien species designations in my career. This was not one of them. No, he said. You wouldn't. That's the point. He told me more. Not much. Fragments, half-remembered from conversations he should never have had, pieced together over 20 years of quiet. Careful thought by a man who was smarter than his career suggested. The species had been contacted once, millennia ago, surveyed, dismissed. And then, much later, centuries, he wasn't sure. They had been contacted again under very different circumstances, and something had happened. Something the collective had decided to erase, not just classify. Erase. Erase how? I asked. The way you erase a geological stratum, he said. You don't destroy the rock. You just stop including it in the survey. You draw the boundary line above it and label everything below as basement. Terminal. No further sampling required. He was quoting my own survey. He knew it. I knew it. The parallel was not accidental. Korathsev, I said. Are you telling me the collective buried a ship under this basin and then deliberately constructed a geological narrative to hide it? I'm telling you, he said, that someone pulled the same trick on the archive that you pulled on the Vathorn stratigraphy. They drew a line, said nothing below this, and waited for everyone to believe it. The silence between us was the silence of 2 people who have just discovered that their entire professional lives have been spent inside a lie. His lie was smaller, A military career built on the assumption that the Sethari collective had no serious threats. Mine was larger. 61 years of geological work conducted above a warship, producing data that confirmed the warship wasn't there. He filed the military report himself over my protests. He did not file a redaction order. He did not seal the core samples. He forwarded the sonar image, the spectral analysis, the depth measurements, and a single-line summary. Subsurface anomaly consistent with a buried vessel of non-Sethari origin, estimated length 2 kilometers, directly to the Central Authority on the homeworld. The response came in 3 hours, not from the Central Authority's Science Division, not from the Geological Survey Board, from the Advisory Council, the innermost circle of Sethari governance, and a body of 12 individuals whose deliberations are classified at a level so high that most citizens do not know the council exists. The response was 2 words: evacuate Aswan. No explanation, no context, no instructions beyond the 2 words. Just evacuate, as if the discovery of a buried ship, large, yes, anomalous, certainly, but inert, dormant, sealed in rock for 7 centuries, warranted the abandonment of an entire colony world. I have spent 5 months thinking about those 2 words. The Advisory Council, 12 individuals who oversee 17 worlds, 4.2 billion citizens, and the largest bureaucratic apparatus in the known galaxy, responded to a geological anomaly report in 3 hours with a 2-word evacuation order. 3 hours. The standard processing time for an Advisory Council decision is 6 to 8 weeks. I once submitted a request to reclassify a mineral deposit on Aswan's northern continent, and the approval took 14 months. 3 hours. 2 words. They did not need to deliberate. They did not need to research. They did not need to verify the sonar image or cross-reference the core sample or consult their geological advisors. They knew what was buried in the Vathorn Basin because they had buried it, and the moment someone told them it had been found, they understood, instantly, viscerally, with the certainty of guilty knowledge, what was going to happen next. Korthsev, read the order. He went pale. He went paler than I had ever seen a Sethari go, which is a significant statement because our species has 4 circulatory pigments and can express a remarkable range of chromatic distress. He looked at me and said, "They know what it is." "Of course they know what it is," I said. "They buried it." "You don't understand," he said. "If they are evacuating the planet, if the Advisory Council itself is responding, then they think it might wake up." I remember the silence that followed that sentence. My laboratory has excellent soundproofing, necessary for the spectrometer, which is sensitive to vibration. In that silence, I could hear the hum of the instrument, the tick of the climate control, and beneath those sounds, beneath everything, so faint I might have imagined it, a vibration. Low, steady, rhythmic, coming from below, from 800 meters below, the evacuation began. Korthsev coordinated with the colonial garrison. 400 soldiers and 3 orbital patrol craft, wholly inadequate for the task. Civilian transports were requisitioned. Emergency shelters at the equatorial settlement, 4,000 kilometers north, were activated. The population of the Vathorn Research Zone, approximately 12,000 Sethari, mostly scientists and support staff, were given 6 hours to the surface landing pads. Most of them made it. Some did not. Not because of violence, not because of any hostile action, but because there were not enough transports, and the timetable was based on a bureaucratic estimate of how long it takes to move 12,000 people through corridors designed for 200 at a time. The Sethari Collective is very good at building archives and very bad at building evacuation routes. I did not evacuate. I stayed in my laboratory. I stayed because I am an archivist, and because the core sample was on my desk, and because some part of me, the part that had spent 61 years cataloging the bones of planets, understood that what was about to happen was the most significant geological event in Sethari history, and I wanted to see it. I felt it before I saw it. The vibration that I had dismissed as imagination, the low, steady, rhythmic pulse from below grew louder, not gradually, not in stages. It increased in a smooth, continuous curve, as if something vast and mechanical were spinning up from standby to full power, running through a startup sequence that it had rehearsed 10,000 times in the dark, waiting for this moment. The floor of my laboratory began to shake. Not violently, not the jagged, erratic shaking of an earthquake, which I had experienced twice in my career and could recognize by feel. This was smooth, controlled, purposeful. The vibration of an engine, transmitted through 1,800 meters of rock, arriving at the surface as a low harmonic that set the tea trembling in my cup, and the spectrometer humming, a note it had never produced before. Then the sound. A sound I will carry with me until I die, and possibly beyond, if whatever passes for an afterlife in Sethari theology has room for the memories of traumatized geologists. It was not an explosion. It was not a roar. It was a tearing, a deep, grinding, geological tearing, as if the planet itself were being opened along a seam that had been stitched shut 700 years ago and was now being pulled apart by something that no longer wished to be contained. Rock splitting, stone screaming, kilometers of compacted sediment and basalt and engineered overburden coming apart under pressure from below, and beneath all of it, rising through the destruction like a voice through static, the sound of engines. Human engines, I know that now. I did not know it then. Then I simply heard the sound and understood, in the deep animal part of my brain that exists beneath science and reason, that something enormous was coming up. I went to the viewport. My laboratory is on the surface. A reinforced dome at the edge of the basin, designed to withstand the minor seismic events common to the region. It was not designed for what I saw. The floor of the Vathorn Basin, 3 kilometers of flat, gray, unremarkable rock that I had walked across 1,000 times, was rising, bulging upward in the center, cracking at the edges, splitting along lines that radiated outward like the petals of a grotesque flower. Rock that had been stable for millions of years was being pushed aside by something beneath it, something that was not rising quickly, but was rising unstoppably, with the patient, implacable force of a geological process compressed into minutes. The first breach was at the center of the basin. A crack, 200 meters long, opened in the rock, and through it came light. Not daylight, not the pale gray light of Aswan's overcast sky. This was yellow, warm, artificial, the light of a corridor or a compartment or a bridge, the interior light of a structure that had been sealed in darkness for 7 centuries, and was now, for the first time, visible from the surface. The crack widened, more light poured out, and then slowly, with a grinding inevitability that made my bones ache, the rock parted and the ship emerged. It came up bow first. The forward section, a tapered wedge of black metal, scarred, pitted, ancient, rose through the shattered basin floor like a mountain being born. Dust and debris cascaded off its hull in rivers of gray. Stone cracked and fell away from its flanks in slabs the size of buildings. The sound was beyond description, a continuous, thundering roar of displaced rock and screaming metal and engine power that vibrated in my teeth and blurred my vision and made the reinforced viewport flex inward by 3 centimeters. I stood at the viewport and watched. I did not move. I did not breathe. I watched a 200-meter warship rise out of the body of a planet like a blade being drawn from a wound, and I understood, with the absolute clarity of a man watching his own assumptions die, that everything I had believed about the Sethari Collective, its history, its honesty, its geological archive, was wrong. The ship took 47 minutes to fully clear the surface. 47 minutes of continuous ascent, during which 4.2 kilometers of warship, a ship longer than the basin that had contained it was wide, pulled itself free of the rock and rose into the sky on engines that burned the basin floor to glass. I watched all of it, every second. I stood at the viewport with my hands flat against the glass. I did not realize I was pressing against it until later, when I found the impressions of my palms in the thermal coating. And I watched the body of my planet come apart to release something that should never have been put inside it. The midsection emerged after the first 20 minutes. This was the widest part of the hull, nearly 900 meters across, studded with weapons mounts and sensor arrays and docking ports, every surface covered in the same scarred, pitted black metal. As it rose, the rock peeled away from it in sheets, falling back into the widening chasm below, and I could see, clearly, undeniably, that the hull was intact, not just structurally sound. Intact. 700 years in the crushed embrace of a planet's crust, and the ship looked as if it had been parked there last week and was simply pulling out of its berth. The aft section was the last to clear. The engines. I understood then what I had been hearing for the past day, that low, steady vibration that I had dismissed as imagination, that Kestorel's instruments had not been calibrated to detect, that had been humming through 1,800 meters of rock as steadily as a heartbeat. The engines were visible now, 4 massive drive units arranged in a cruciform pattern, each one larger than a Sethari cruiser, each one glowing with a light that was not fire and not plasma and not anything I had a word for. The light was white, not the white of heat, the white of something absolute, something operating at the limit of a principle I did not understand. The heat was extraordinary. The air above the basin shimmered and distorted. The rock at the edges of the breach glowed red, then orange, then white. My viewport's thermal coating activated, a feature I had never needed in 61 years of geological work. The ship hovered. It hung above the Vathorn Basin at an altitude of approximately 2,000 meters, close enough that its hull filled my entire field of vision, close enough that I could see individual features, weapons turrets, sensor arrays, docking bays, hull plates scored by ancient damage and never repaired. Markings on the hull, barely visible under centuries of mineral accretion, in a script I did not recognize. Characters, a name perhaps, though I could not read it. I tried. I pressed my face against the viewport and tried to read the characters, knowing I could not, knowing the script was not any Sathari glyph system, knowing that I was engaging in the futile behavior of a person who cannot accept that there are things beyond their capacity to catalog. Old habit. 61 years of old habit. When you do not understand something, you look at it harder. You apply more instruments. You run more tests. You try. The characters were angular, precise, cut into the hull material in a way that suggested they had been applied at manufacture, not engraved after the fact, part of the ship's structure, not decoration. There were many of them. A sequence along the port bow, running for at least 200 meters of hull surface. I counted what I could see. 47 characters, possibly more, obscured by mineral deposits. A name or a designation or a record. A ship that carries its identity on its hull in characters that were not designed for Sathari eyes to read. It was black, not painted black, built black. The hull material itself was dark, absorptive, drinking light rather than reflecting it. Against the gray Oswain sky, it was a void, a ship-shaped absence, an object defined more by what it blocked than by what it showed. I counted the weapons mounts I could see from my viewport. 47 on the port side alone. Some were turrets, rotating platforms bearing weapons of a type I could not identify, sleek and angular and wrong-looking, as if they had been designed by engineers who understood physics differently than we do. Some were fixed emplacements, long, slender barrels recessed into the hull, aimed forward, their apertures dark and patient. One, amidships, was larger than the rest, a single weapon mount the size of a Sathari patrol craft, its barrel extending 400 meters from the hull, aimed at nothing, waiting for a target that had not been selected yet. The ship did not fire, it did not broadcast. It did not acknowledge the three Sathari dreadnoughts, the pale vigil, the unblinking eye, and the theorem of patience that had arrived in orbit during the 47-minute emergence, and were now holding position at 40,000 kilometers, their weapon systems active, their crews presumably experiencing the same chromatic distress that I was. 3 Orhan-class dreadnoughts, 1 kilometers each, 3.3 kilometers of the finest warships the Sathari Collective had ever built, crewed by 12,000 of our best-trained officers, armed with weapons that could sterilize a continent. The thing hovering above my laboratory was 4.2 kilometers long. It had just risen through 800 meters of solid rock without apparent effort. Its engines were operating at a temperature of 340 degrees, a reading that our sensors detected from the surface, through the hull, through kilometers of intervening atmosphere, which meant the actual operating temperature was higher, possibly much higher, possibly in a range that our instruments were not calibrated to measure. It had been buried for 700 years. Its engines had been running the entire time, 700 years, at 340 degrees, continuously, without fuel, without maintenance, without crew, because the crew, I would learn later, were not aboard. The crew were somewhere else entirely and had been for 7 centuries, and the ship had been running on its own, patient and autonomous and faithful, waiting in the dark for something that standing at my viewport with cold tea and a core sample and 61 years of misplaced confidence, had accidentally provided. A reason to wake up. The ship hung above the basin for 11 minutes. I timed it. 11 minutes of stillness, during which the pale vigil, the unblinking eye, and the theorem of patience maintained their positions, and I learned later, transmitted continuous hailing signals on every frequency the Sathari. Military uses, standard contact protocols, identification requests, warnings, please, gets no response. The ship did not acknowledge the dreadnoughts. It did not acknowledge the hailing signals. It did not acknowledge Asuan, or the Sathari Collective, or the 400 years of civilization that had built itself on the assumption that it was the dominant power in this region of space. After 11 minutes, it moved, not toward the dreadnoughts, not toward the colony. It rose vertically, smoothly, with an acceleration that should have been impossible for an object of its mass, and climbed through the atmosphere in 90 seconds, through the atmosphere, past the orbital shell, past the 3 dreadnoughts which tracked it with every sensor they had and did not fire, because their commanders were not stupid and could count weapons mounts as well as I could. It passed the pale vigil at a distance of 800 meters. 800 meters. Close enough to spit at, in spatial terms. Close enough that the pale vigil's external cameras captured images of the hull in high resolution, Images that I have since seen that have been distributed to every senior official in the collective that show in merciless detail the texture of a ship that was old when our great-grandparents were born. Korathsev was on the Pale Vigil. He had boarded it during the evacuation, part of the military response. And so, he saw the vaulted ark pass at 800 meters from the bridge of an Orhen, class Dreadnought. He told me about it afterward, in the communication he sent from the Pale Vigil's relay station 3 days after the event, in the flat, careful language of a man who has decided that the only way to survive what he witnessed is to describe it as precisely as possible, and not allow himself to think about what it means, he said. The ship passed at 800 meter on a bearing of UZL-42 Mark 17. Relative velocity 2, 400 meters per second, and accelerating. Duration of close passage, 1.3 seconds. I could see the weapon mounts. The turrets were not tracking us. They were pointed forward, locked, as if we were not worth turning toward. I have been a military officer for 30 years. I have trained on every threat classification protocol the collective has produced. I could not find a category for what I felt during those 3 seconds. The closest word I have is irrelevance. The ship did not ignore us. Ignoring implies you noticed the thing and chose not to respond. The ship did not notice us at all. He retired shortly after, submitted his pension paperwork from the Pale Vigil. I understand why. The hull was scarred, not weathered, scarred. Weapons damage, old and deep, from a conflict that predated the burial by some unknown interval. Gouges in the black metal, each one large enough to fit a Sethari shuttle inside. Impact craters where projectiles or energy weapons had struck and been absorbed by armor that bent but did not break. And beneath the scars, beneath the mineral accretion and the dust of 7 centuries underground, the hull was intact. Whole. Functional. Whatever had hit this ship, whenever it had happened, the ship had won. The vaulted ark, I call it that now because that is what the classified files call it, the name inscribed in the human script on its hull, cleared the Asawan system in 4 minutes. It passed through our orbital infrastructure, without deviation, without communication, without looking back. It oriented itself toward a point in space that the collective's navigators later identified as the direction of a star called Sol, a yellow dwarf, unremarkable, 4,000 light-years from Aswan, in a region of the galaxy that the collective's surveys had marked as low interest and never revisited Sol, the human homeworld. I did not know this at the time. I did not know what a human was. The word did not appear in any archive I could access. It appeared in archives I could not. The Advisory Council convened within hours of the Vaulted Ark's departure. Maelthren, Senior Advisory Counselor, a title that carries more real power than any elected position in the collective, issued a classification order that locked every piece of data related to the event behind the highest security tier in Sethari governance. The sonar images, the core samples, the spectral analysis, the emergence footage, the Dreadnought sensor logs, my anomaly report, Form GR-17, filed at 1440 on an ordinary day that was no longer ordinary. All of it classified, all of it sealed, all of it placed in a restricted archive that only 12 individuals in the entire collective could access. And then Maelthren did something extraordinary. She declassified a different set of files, older files, files from 700 years ago, from the deep archive, from the level of classification that Korathsev's superior had drunkenly hinted at before being quietly retired. Files that had been sealed since before I was born, since before my parents were born, since before the Keth Torel archive existed. She declassified them because she told the council the secret was no longer worth keeping. The ship was awake. The ship was going home. Whatever happened next would happen whether the collective acknowledged the truth or not. And she preferred, her word, I am told, to face it with open eyes. I understand her reasoning. As an archivist, I even admire it. There is a kind of courage in opening a file that has been sealed for 700 years, knowing that what it contains will reshape every assumption your civilization has built about itself. It is the courage of a geologist who drills past the basement, expecting mantle transition, and finds manufactured metal instead. The courage to look at data that contradicts the model and accept the data. Maelthren had that courage. I wish the Advisory Council of 700 years ago had possessed it too. But they did not. They had the opposite. The cowardice of a civilization that receives a gift it does not deserve, cannot understand, and cannot control, and decides to bury it rather than be grateful. The files were 400 pages long. I have read them. I have read them 4 times. Each time, I understand more, and each time, the understanding makes me wish I had remained an archivist who believed the geological record was complete. This is what the files say. 8,400 years ago, 8,400 years before I pulled core sample VB7714 from the Vathorn Basin, the Sathari collective made first contact with a species called humans. The contact was brief. 11 months of observation, conducted remotely, from a survey vessel that had stumbled across a planetary system containing a world with an oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere and electromagnetic emissions, consistent with early industrial technology. The humans were, by the standards the collective applied at the time, primitive, pre-spaceflight, confined to a single world. Their electromagnetic emissions suggested internal conflict, rudimentary communication systems, and a technological base roughly equivalent to what the collective had possessed 6,000 years before the contact. The survey team cataloged them: species designation, planetary coordinates, atmospheric composition, estimated population, a handful of biological samples collected remotely from the upper atmosphere, and filed a recommendation: no strategic value, no contact recommended, monitor at discretion. I have seen the original survey report. It is 6 pages long. 6 pages for an entire species, their biology, their technology, their culture, their potential. The collective's archives contain more detailed reports on mineral deposits. The survey team spent 11 months observing the humans and concluded that they were, and I quote, a carbon-based endothermic species of moderate intelligence, demonstrating typical pre-spaceflight social organization with no indicators of accelerated development. Typical, moderate, no indicators. Words that mean we looked, we saw nothing special, we moved on. They were wrong. They were catastrophically, historically, species-endingly wrong. But the report was filed, and the file was closed, and the collective did what the collective always does. It categorized, and it moved on, and it did not look back. The collective did not monitor. The humans were forgotten. 700 years ago, 700 years after that initial contact, the collective was dying, not from age, not from internal collapse, from the Vrethkai. The files describe the Vrethkai in clinical terms that do not convey the horror: a hive mind species, decentralized cognition, no individuals, no leadership, no command structure that could be targeted, 200 million nodes, each one a biological processing unit connected to every other node through a form of quantum-entangled neural signaling that the collectives, scientists could detect but not understand. I've spent time with those sections of the file. The Vrethkai were not evil. By any definition the collective applies to that word. They were not malicious. They had no agenda of conquest, no desire for domination, no ideology of expansion. They consumed because consuming was what they were: their biology, their cognition. Their existence was organized around the acquisition and processing of resources. They dismantled planets the way a river erodes stone, not with intent, not with malice, but with the implacable continuity of a process that does not know how to stop. The collective could not fight them, because you cannot fight a process. You cannot kill a hive mind by cutting off its head. You cannot negotiate with a river. You can only redirect it, or dam it, or, as the Vaulted Ark demonstrated, drain it entirely. I try not to think about the Vrethkai too carefully. They are extinct. The file is closed. My note in the archive is brief. Species designation: Vrethkai status: extinct. Cause: engagement with human warship Vaulted Ark 700 years prior to present record. A single line. A species that existed for the files do not say how long, and I have not found another record for whatever span of time it takes a decentralized hive mind to develop, evolve, and spread across multiple systems, reduced to a single line in an archivist's index. The Vaulted Ark did not file a philosophical note about the ethics of what it had done. It filed coordinates and kill counts. The record is complete. The mission was accomplished. Move on. I find to my discomfort that I understand this approach very well. 14,000 combat units, organic vessels, grown rather than built, armed with weapons that operated on principles the collective's physicists classified as theoretically impossible. The Vrethkai did not negotiate. They did not communicate. They consumed. They entered a system, dismantled its orbital infrastructure, stripped its planets of useful materials, and moved on. They had destroyed 4 Sathari colony worlds in 18 months. The collective's fleet, the full fleet, all 19 Orin-class Dreadnoughts, plus 200 support vessels, had engaged the Vrethkai twice and been defeated both times. Not destroyed, the collective does not waste ships, but driven back, outmaneuvered, outgunned, unable to inflict meaningful damage on a force that regenerated faster than it could be killed. The collective was losing. The projections, coldly mathematical, compiled by strategists who had never known defeat, gave the collective 8 months before the Vrethkai reached the homeworld. 8 months before the species that had built the largest archive in the galaxy was erased from it. In desperation, The Advisory Council authorized a measure that had never been attempted in 90,400 years of Sithari civilization. They sent a distress call, not to another Sithari world, not to an ally. The collective had no allies, because the collective had never needed allies, because the collective had always been the most powerful force in its region of space. They sent it to everyone, every frequency, every direction. A broadband plea transmitted at maximum power repeating on a loop. We are the Sithari collective. We are under attack. We cannot win. If anyone can hear this, we need help. It was the first time in 9,400 years that the collective had admitted it could not win something. The minutes of the council session that authorized the transmission record the vote. 8 in favor, 4 abstaining. No votes against, not because the councilors were unanimous, but because the 4 who would have voted against could not bring themselves to vote the extinction of their species purely on the grounds of institutional pride. Even the Sithari collective has limits. One response came back. 1. From a direction that the collective's databases identified, after considerable searching, as the location of a yellow dwarf star called Sol, a system that had been surveyed once, 7,700 years earlier, and filed under no strategic value. The response took 19 days to arrive. The speed of light from Sol to the collective's homeworld is approximately 4,000 years. The human response arrived in 19 days. This means either that the humans received the distress call before it reached them, which is not possible, or that the humans had already known the collective existed and the collective's situation and were already moving before the signal arrived. The files do not address this discrepancy. I have added a note to my personal archive flagging it as an unresolved anomaly. It may be the most important anomaly in the history of my species. The response was short. It was in a language the collective had to spend 4 hours translating, cross-referencing against the 8 400-year-old linguistic samples from the original survey. When the translation was complete, it read, 1 ship. En route. Do not fire on it. 1 ship. The collective had thrown 19 dreadnoughts and 200 support vessels at the Vrethkai and been beaten back twice. And this species, this primitive species from a low-interest system, this footnote in the survey archive, was sending 1 ship. The collective's military leadership dismissed it. A token gesture. A political signal from a minor power that wanted to be seen, responding to a crisis without committing real resources. The Advisory Council noted the response, filed it, and returned to the business of planning the evacuation of the homeworld. The ship arrived 19 days later. 19 days. The distress call had been broadcast to every direction at light speed, meaning it would take years, decades, centuries to reach any civilization outside the collective's immediate neighborhood. The humans received it and dispatched a ship in less than 3 weeks. The implications of this, the speed of their communications, the readiness of their fleet, the proximity of their territory, despite the collective's belief that the nearest non-Sithari civilization was, thousands of light years away, were lost on the Advisory Council at the time. They had other concerns. The Vrethkai were 6 systems away from the homeworld and closing. The files described the ship, 4,200 meters long, black hull, absorptive coating, no reflective surfaces, weapons mounts visible on every surface, turrets, fixed emplacements, arrays of devices that the collective's analysts could not identify and did not attempt to classify. It emerged from superluminal travel at the edge of the Therakine system, the collective's outermost colony, the next target on the Vrethkai advance, and broadcast a single message. Sithari Collective, this is the Vaulted Ark. We are here. Point us at the enemy. Asu the Wren, Fleet Commander, the highest military rank in the collective, a position that at that moment carried the weight of species survival, pointed them at the enemy. The Vaulted Ark engaged the Vrethkai at Therakine. The collective sensor logs, the real ones, the ones that were classified for 700 years, record the engagement in detail that reads like theology rather than military history. The Vrethkai had 14,000 combat units in the Therakine system, 14,000 organic vessels, each one grown and armed and connected to the hive mind, each one capable of regeneration, each one part of a distributed consciousness that could not be killed by cutting off a head because there was no head to cut. The Vaulted Ark destroyed the first 2,047 minutes. Not engaged, not fought, destroyed. The sensor logs show it in detail I wish I could unsee. The weapons on that ship, weapons the collective's analyst later described as localized space-time distortion devices, a phrase that means, in plain language, they bent the fabric of reality around each target until the target no longer occupied coherent space. Those weapons fired continuously for 47 minutes. Each shot was silent. Each shot was invisible to the naked eye. The only evidence that a weapon had been fired was the sudden, total absence of the target. One moment, a Vrethkai combat unit, a living vessel, 200 meters of grown chitin and neural tissue, armed, dangerous, connected to a hive mind that spanned star systems. The next moment, nothing. A gap in the formation, a silence on the quantum neural network where a voice had been. 2,000 units in 47 minutes. That is approximately one kill every 1.4 seconds, sustained without interruption, across a three-dimensional combat volume 80,000 kilometers wide. The vaulted ark did not maneuver for advantage. It did not seek cover. It did not coordinate with the collective's dreadnoughts, which were holding position at the edge of the system, weapons armed, crews watching, unable to contribute anything meaningful to what they were witnessing. The ship simply advanced through the Vrethkai formation at a steady speed, firing in every direction, killing with every shot, and the Vrethkai, for the first time in the 18 months of the war, for the first time in their existence as a species, could not regenerate fast enough. The remaining 12,000 units attempted to flee. The vaulted ark pursued. It was faster than the Vrethkai, faster than anything the collective had ever tracked, faster than the theoretical maximum velocity that Sethari physics said was possible. It hunted the Vrethkai through three systems, Therakeen, Kosuthan, the Dren Expanse, destroying them in waves in thousands in a methodical, systematic campaign of annihilation that the classified files describe with a word the collective does not normally use for military operations. Extermination, 9 weeks. In 9 weeks, the vaulted ark, one ship, one crew of 3,200, from a species the collective had dismissed as primitive 8, 400 years earlier, tracked down and destroyed every Vrethkai combat unit in the region, all 14,000. And then it went further. It found the Vrethkai's reproductive nodes, the biological factories where new combat units were grown, and new neural connections were established. There were 200 million of them, distributed across a volume of space that would take the collective's fleet 6 months to traverse. The vaulted ark reached them in 11 days. It destroyed every single one. 200 million nodes, an entire species, its reproductive capacity, its cognitive network, its ability to exist as a distributed consciousness, erased from the galaxy by one ship in 9 weeks. The Vrethkai are extinct. They have been extinct for 700 years. The collective knows this because the vaulted ark's crew provided detailed post-action reports, coordinates, kill counts, verification scans, showing that every node, every combat unit, every trace of Vrethkai biology had been eliminated. The files include these reports. They are written in the same plain, technical language as the vaulted ark's initial communication. No boasting, no triumph, no emotion at all, just data, coordinates and numbers and the quiet certainty of a job completed. I have read those postposted reports, every page, multiple times. And what strikes me every time is not the numbers, not the 14,000 combat units or the 200 million nodes or the 9 weeks. What strikes me is the tone. The reports read the way my own geological surveys read. Methodical, precise, comprehensive. Coordinates logged. Actions taken. Outcomes confirmed. No editorializing. No reflection. No sense that the authors understood they had just ended a species and saved a civilization that had not yet decided to betray them. They sound like archivists. Patient, diligent, thorough archivists, cataloging the end of the Vrethkai War the way I catalog mineral strata, because the record matters, because the data must be preserved, because incomplete archives lead to decisions made in ignorance. I wonder sometimes, if the humans have an archive like mine, a catalog of species contacted, surveyed, assessed, I wonder what their entry for the Sethathari Collective says, what category we were filed under, whether the entry has been updated in the past 5 months, and if so, what words they chose. The collective was saved. The Vrethkai were gone. The 200 humans aboard the vaulted ark had done in 9 weeks what the entire Sethari military had failed to do in 18 months. And then the advisory council made a decision. I have read the minutes of the meeting. They are part of the declassified files. Maelthren, not the current Maelthren, her ancestor, the one who held the seat 700 years ago, chaired the session. The minutes are precise, clinical. The language of bureaucrats discussing policy. The policy they discussed was this. The humans were too dangerous to remain free, not too dangerous to exist, though the minutes record that one counselor raised the possibility and was voted down, not on moral grounds but on practical ones. They had just watched a single ship exterminate a species in 9 weeks. The idea of provoking the civilization that built that ship was, in the words of the minutes, strategically inadvisable, not wrong, not unconscionable, not a betrayal of the species that saved us from extinction, strategically inadvisable. I have thought about those two words many times. The Council was not proposing extermination. They were proposing containment, neutralization, the permanent removal of the vaulted ark and its crew from the strategic picture. Accomplished through means that would not provoke the humans' home civilization, assuming the home civilization did not already know what had happened, assuming the single ship had been sent without oversight, assuming that the humans were, at their core, still the primitive species the collective had surveyed 8,400 years ago and could be managed with sufficient planning. Assumptions. The Sethari Collective's archive contains 340 exabytes of data, and none of it prevented the Advisory Council from making the worst assumptions in the history of our species. The plan was a ceremony, a celebration, a gesture of gratitude to the humans who had saved the collective. Held on Aswan in the Vathorn Basin, far from any population center, a location chosen not for its beauty, the Vathorn Basin has none, but for its geology, deep sedimentary layers, stable tectonic profile, a place where something large could be buried and the stone would close over it and hold it down. The vaulted ark landed. Its crew, 3,200 humans, disembarked. The Sethari delegation met them with honors and gifts and speeches about the eternal friendship between their two species, and neural toxin, delivered through the atmosphere of the ceremonial pavilion, tailored to human neurology based on data collected during the 11-month survey, 400 years earlier, data from remote observation, from atmospheric samples, from biological scans taken without the humans' knowledge or consent. The toxin was fast. The humans lost consciousness in 4 minutes. Some of them were still holding their ceremonial gifts when they fell. The collective's engineers spent 3 days aboard the vaulted ark, trying to understand its technology. They failed. The weapons could not be disarmed. The engines could not be shut down. The navigation systems could not be accessed. The ship's internal security systems, automated, relentless, patient, sealed every critical compartment the moment the crew's biometric signatures went offline. The engineers could walk the corridors. They could look at the walls. They could stand on the bridge and see the control interfaces and read the displays and understand nothing, because the ship had decided, in whatever way a machine decides things, that these were not its people, and it was not going to cooperate. So they buried it, a controlled volcanic event, engineered by the collective's geophysicists, good ones, the best, working from detailed models of the Vathorn Basin's tectonic structure. They triggered a subsidence event that collapsed the basin floor, dropped the ship 1,800 meters into the planet's crust, and then sealed the breach with engineered lava flows and sediment compaction. 2 weeks of carefully managed geological catastrophe, and then the ship was gone. I have read the engineering reports from those 2 weeks. They are part of the declassified file, a smaller subfile classified separately, containing the technical documentation of what amounted to the largest covert geological operation in Sethari history. The reports are thorough, precise, written by people who were clearly proud of their work. There are performance metrics, efficiency ratings, a note from the lead geophysicist, a name I recognize from citations in the foundational texts of my field, a researcher I was taught to revere, expressing satisfaction at the clean execution of the burial sequence. Clean execution. The ship sealed in stone. The planet's surface restored to its pre-event profile within acceptable deviation. The geological record adjusted, layer by layer, to show nothing anomalous. To show a basin floor that had always been a basin floor, over nothing more interesting than the standard Hadean basalt. The geological record adjusted, by my predecessors, using techniques that later became the standard methodology of Sethari Deep Geological Survey. Techniques I learned. Techniques I applied for 61 years to confirm repeatedly that nothing was there. Clean execution. I set that phrase down carefully and file it where it belongs. Buried alive. The ship's engines running at 340 degrees, its lights still on, its weapons loaded, its navigation system locked on Sol. The 3,200 unconscious humans were placed in stasis chambers on the homeworld. The records were scrubbed. Every reference to the word human was erased from the public archive. The Vrethkai War was rewritten as a Sethari victory achieved through Sethari resolve and Sethari military genius. The vaulted ark was never mentioned. The ceremony in the Vathorn Basin was never mentioned. The 3,200 people sleeping in stasis vaults beneath the homeworld were never mentioned. The Advisory Council sealed the files, classified them at a level that only 12 living individuals could access, and then they went back to running the collective, confident that the problem was solved, the danger contained, the debt erased by the simple expedient of pretending it had never been incurred. 700 years of silence. 700 years of the vaulted Ark's engines running in the dark, burning at 340 degrees, patient and steady and certain. 700 years of lights glowing behind armored glass, illuminating corridors that no one walked, compartments that no one entered, a bridge where no one sat. 700 years of weapons loaded and primed and aimed at nothing, waiting for a targeting solution that had not been assigned. I try to imagine it. I try to imagine what it means for a machine to run, alone, in complete darkness for 7 centuries. No maintenance, no fuel replenishment, no software updates, no crew rotations, no inspections. Just the engine and the dark and the weight of wafting 800 meters of stone pressing down on a hull that did not bend. The ship did not know it had been betrayed. Machines do not know things. But the ship behaved as if it knew, as if some subroutine, some deep-level programming, some instinct coded into its operating system by engineers who understood that their creation might one day be taken from them had anticipated this exact scenario and prepared for it. The engines ran. The lights stayed on. The navigation sys maintained a lock on Sol, the ship's home star, the direction of the civilization that had built it, through 800 meters of rock, through the electromagnetic interference of a planet's mantle, through 7 centuries of geological drift that shifted the basin floor by 0.3 degrees. The navigation lock adjusted, automatically. Every year, every decade, every century, the ship recalculated the bearing to Sol and held it, waiting, patient, certain, 700 years. And then a geologist, 61 years into his career, running out of new strata to catalog, pulled a core sample from 340 meters and found armor plate in a place where no armor should be. The rest, my part of the story, you already know. What you do not know, because I have been telling this backwards and have not yet reached the forward part, is what happened after the vaulted Ark left Tosuan. It arrived at Sol in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours, across a distance that would take a Sithari Dreadnought 14 months at maximum speed. The ship covered the gap between stars the way a bird covers the gap between branches, effortlessly, automatically, as if the distance were a minor inconvenience rather than a physical law. At Sol, the vaulted Ark entered orbit around Earth. The collective's deep space sensors, survey-grade instruments, never intended for intelligence work, barely adequate to the task, detected the ship's arrival and tracked it in orbit for 90 minutes. During those 90 minutes, the sensors recorded high-density communication traffic between the ship and the surface. Encrypted, undecipherable, continuous. 90 minutes of conversation between a vessel that had been buried alive for 700 years and the civilization that had built it. I think about those 90 minutes. I think about them constantly. I think about them the way you think about a locked door, not with urgency, but with the patient, persistent attention of someone who knows there is something behind it and has accepted that they may never know what it is. What did the vaulted Ark tell Earth? The literal content of the transmissions we cannot know, but the substance. The thing that was communicated, the message that a 200-meter warship carried home across half the galaxy after 7 centuries in the dark. I think I can reconstruct it. Not from the transmissions, from what happened next. A fleet of 147 ships assembled at Sol in 30 minutes. Ships that had been dispersed across the galaxy on whatever missions human warships conduct in the uncharted regions beyond the collective's borders, converged on a signal in 30 minutes. The coordination required for that response, the communication infrastructure, the operational readiness, the shared understanding of what the signal meant and what was required, is not improvised. It is not assembled in 30 minutes. It exists. It has existed, ready and maintained, for reasons that the collective chose not to investigate, because investigating would have required admitting that the humans existed and were worth watching. 148 ships, assembled from across the galaxy in the time it takes the collective to process a routine administrative appeal, because one ship sent a signal, because one ship came home and told its builders what it had found. That is what the 90 minutes produced. That is what the vaulted Ark communicated in its first 90 minutes of freedom, after 7 centuries of stone. I think about those 90 minutes. I think about what it means to wait 700 years for something, and then, in the first moment of freedom, spend the first 90 minutes not flying, not fighting, not fleeing, but talking, transmitting, reporting, as if the most important thing, after 7 centuries of solitude, was making sure the record was complete, making sure someone knew what had happened, making sure the truth was in an archive somewhere, filed correctly, impossible to bury again. It told them what we did. It told them about the war, the distress call, the response, one ship, sent across the galaxy to help a species that had dismissed humans as primitive 8,000 years earlier. It told them about Therakine, Kosuthan, the Dren Expanse, 9 weeks, 14,000 combat units, 200 million nodes, an entire species erased from existence because the Sethari Collective asked for help and the humans said yes. And then it told them about the ceremony, the pavilion, the neural toxin, the 4 minutes, the bodies falling with gifts still in their hands, the 3 days of engineers aboard its decks, touching its walls, reading its displays, failing to understand a single system, the controlled eruption, the burial, the stone closing over its hull like a grave being filled, the 700 years of darkness, the steady 340 degrees of its engines, never cooling, never stopping, running on patience and mechanical faith, and the absolute certainty that someday somehow someone would come. That is what the Vaulted Ark told Earth. I am certain of it. Not because I can decode the transmissions, but because I am an archivist, and I know how records work. The ship was a record, its hull was a document, its scars were the text, and its engines, running for 700 years in the dark, were the signature. And then 147 ships arrived. The collective sensors detected them as superluminal emergence events, gravitational disturbances, each one corresponding to a warship transitioning from faster-than-light travel into normal space. They appeared in the Sol system over a span of 30 minutes, not one at a time, not in pairs. In waves, first 12, then 30, then 40, then 65, as if they had been dispersed across the galaxy on separate missions and were now converging on a signal. A recall, a summons. The Vaulted Ark called them home, and they came. The collective's deep space analysts worked through the emergence data in real time, cataloging each arrival, estimating tonnages, classifying hull types, counting weapons mounts. I have read their reports. The language starts clinical, standard analytical notation, the dry vocabulary of intelligence officers doing their jobs. By the 30th arrival, the language has changed. By the 60th, the reports contain sentences that do not appear in any military intelligence document I have ever seen. One analyst wrote, "I recommend we stop counting and start praying." Another wrote simply, "They have more, they have more." 2 words that carry the weight of a civilizational reckoning. The collective had assumed, had needed to assume, had built 700 years of policy on the assumption that the Vaulted Ark was unique, one ship, an outlier, a singular expression of human capability that could be contained by the burial of a single vessel and the erasure of a single word from the archive. 147 more ships said otherwise. 147 warships. 9 distinct classes, ranging from 800-meter escorts to 2.1-kilometer battlecruisers. Every one of them bearing the same hull characteristics. The black absorptive coating, the battle scars, the mismatched plating, the manufacturing stamps in Latin derivative script. Every one of them old. Every one of them functional. Every one of them crude. The humans had not been idle for 700 years. They had been building. Or perhaps they had always had this fleet, and the Vaulted Ark had been one of many, and the collective had never known, because the collective had looked at the humans once, 8,400 years ago, for 11 months, and filed them under primitive and never looked again. The fleet assembled around the Vaulted Ark in a formation so precise that the collective's analysts initially thought it was computer-controlled. It was not. Each ship was crewed. Each crew was responding to the same signal, taking the same position, holding the same station, with the kind of discipline that comes not from training but from tradition. Tradition so deep it has passed from skill into instinct, from doctrine into identity, from something you do into something you are. 148 ships, 40,000 kilometers of formation, arrayed around the Vaulted Ark, the way a family gathers around a member who has been gone a long time and come home with a story to tell. Then the fleet moved, all 148 ships, simultaneously, accelerating into superluminal travel on an identical heading. Their course was not toward Aswane, not toward any Sethari system. They headed galactic north, into uncharted space, and they vanished. They have not returned. It has been 5 months. 5 months of silence. 5 months during which the Sethari Collective, the oldest continuous civilization in the known galaxy, 9,400 years of unbroken history, 17 worlds, 4.2 billion citizens, has done nothing but wait. We are a species that built our identity on knowledge, on archives, on the certainty that if something happened, we recorded it, and if we recorded it, we understood it. We do not know where the human fleet went. We do not know what they are doing. We do not know if they are coming back. We do not know what they will do when they return. The Central Authority has been in continuous session since the fleet's departure. The debates have evolved, or devolved, depending on your perspective. In the first week, the debates were about containment. In the second week, The word containment was quietly removed from the official vocabulary after Asutharen. Still fleet commander, still carrying the rank, though the rank now feels like a ceremonial title for a species that has no fleet worth commanding, pointed out that you cannot contain a civilization that possesses 148 warships, any one of which could destroy the collective's entire military in an afternoon. The debates shifted to damage control, then to diplomacy, then to something that the collective has never practiced in 9,400 years: apology. Maelthren has proposed a diplomatic mission. She wants to go to Seoul personally. She wants to carry with her the classified files, all 400 pages, and place them before whatever authority the humans have and say, in whatever language bridges the gap between species, we did this. We know we did this. We are sorry. It is, I think, the right thing to do. It is also, I think, entirely insufficient. Sorry is a word for small debts, for borrowed tools not returned, for promises not kept, for moments of thoughtlessness that caused inconvenience. It is not a word that scales to civilizational betrayal. It is not a word that covers 200 people spending 7 centuries asleep in vaults they did not choose. It is not a word that accounts for what the vaulted Ark experienced. If a machine can experience, if running alone in the dark for 700 years constitutes a kind of experience that deserves acknowledgement. I have thought about this. I have thought about it more than I have thought about anything in my career, including the 7-week period when I was trying to resolve the crystallographic anomaly in the northern basin strata that turned out to be a misaligned instrument and not, as I had briefly hoped, evidence of a previously unknown mineral class. The collective will apologize. The council will vote in Maelthren's favor, and a mission will go to Sol, and someone will stand before the humans with the classified files and the core sample, and a prepared statement expressing regret. And the humans will listen, and then the humans will decide. That is the part that keeps me awake at night. Not the apology, the response. We do not know how the humans respond to betrayal. We have one data point. We betrayed them 700 years ago, and they apparently waited, patiently, quietly, running their engines in the dark. And now they know, and they have assembled 148 warships, and they have sailed galactic north into uncharted space, and they have not communicated, and they have not returned. I think she will go. The vote is next week, and the math favors her position, not because the collective has developed moral courage, but because the collective has counted ships. 19 Orhan-class dreadnoughts, each 1.1 kilometers long. The most powerful warships the Sathari collective has produced in 9,000 years of spacefaring history. I helped catalog the geological survey data for the asteroid belt where the Orhan-class's hull plating is mined. I remember thinking, at the time, that the alloy was impressive, dense, resilient, engineered to exacting tolerances. I remember feeling pride that the collective could produce such material. I remember filing the survey data under strategic resource, military application, and feeling that I was contributing, in my small way, to the security of my species. The Orhan-class hull plating has a tolerance of 0.1 millimeters. The armor plate in core sample VB7714, the fragment of human hull that I pulled from the Vathorn Basin, has a tolerance of 0.003 millimeters, 33 times more precise. Manufactured by a species we surveyed once and filed under primitive. 148 human warships, the smallest 800 meters, the largest 4,200, one of which, acting alone, exterminated a species in 9 weeks, one of which, buried under 800 meters of rock for 7 centuries, woke up and flew home without pausing to stretch. If the humans decide to collect the debt, not to help us this time, but to hold us accountable, our 19 dreadnoughts will last approximately as long as the Vrethkai did, 47 minutes, maybe less. The Vrethkai, at least, had the advantage of not having wronged the humans personally. I am an archivist. I catalog things, I classify things. I put things in categories and file them where they belong. It is what I have done for 61 years. It is what I am good at. And it is, I have learned, a way of hiding from the truth. Because a thing that has been classified and filed feels known, feels understood, feels managed, even when it is none of those things. There is a comfort in categories. I did not understand this while I still believed in them. When you have spent 61 years sorting the world into labeled drawers, you stop noticing the sorting. It becomes the air you breathe. The assumption so deep it is no longer an assumption but a fact. The world is classifiable. Everything has a category. Everything fits. The vaulted ark does not fit. Not because it is too large, though it is. Not because it is too old, though it is. Not because its technology is beyond my understanding, though it is. The vaulted ark does not fit because it is a refutation of the principle that things can be filed and forgotten. It is the proof that some truths are too heavy for stone to hold, that 7 centuries of rock is not enough, that the debt you bury is the one that grows compound interest in the dark, accruing weight and momentum and purpose until the day it rises. And when it rises through everything you built on top of it. We built a civilization on top of it. 9,400 years of history, culture, science, art, all of it resting, without our knowledge, on a foundation that was never ours. The Geological Archive of Aswan, the mineral surveys, my index. All of it arranged, layer by layer, above a warship that should have been thanked and honored and sent home 7 centuries ago. The Vaulted Ark does not fit in any category. It is a warship, it is a tomb, it is a rescue mission, it is a betrayal survived. It is a machine that waited 700 years in absolute darkness, running on nothing but the certainty that its builders would not forget, and was right. It is the answer to a question the Sathari Collective asked 700 years ago. Can we bury a debt? And the answer is no. You cannot bury a debt. You can only bury the debtor, and even then, only if the debtor is not a 4-kilometer warship with engines that do not stop and a civilization that does not forget. I have reclassified core sample VB7714. It is no longer filed under anomalous subsurface metallic formation. It is filed under a new category, the first new geological category I have, added to the archive in 30 years. I call it evidence of debt, steel, titanium, chromium, molybdenum, 12 centimeters by 8. A piece of laminated armor plate from the hull of a warship that waited 700 years in the dark, engines running, lights breathing, for the moment when the stone would part, and it would rise and go home to tell its builders what was done while it slept. Maelth Ren has asked me what gift the diplomatic mission should carry to Sol, I told her. Core sample VB7714, a piece of the ship we buried. Let the humans see what their warship became, a geological specimen, filed in a drawer, cataloged by a species that mistook patience for death and silence for surrender. Let them see that we pulled it from the earth and read it, and that we understood at last what it said. And let them decide, with 148 warships at their back, and 200 of their people sleeping in our vaults, and 700 years of debt accruing interest in a currency we cannot afford, whether the confession is enough. I set down my tea. The spectrometer hums. Outside, through the reinforced viewport of my laboratory, the Vathorn Basin sprawls under a clear sky. The crater is still there, 4.3 kilometers long, 800 meters wide, 200 meters deep, the rock at its floor fused to glass by engine exhaust. 5 months old, still warm to the touch. I know because I walked down into it 2 weeks after the evacuation was lifted, on a day when the sky was clear and the monitors showed no anomalous activity, and I placed my hand flat on the glassy surface and felt the residual heat seeping into my palm through 3 layers of protective material. Warm. After 5 months. The rock the engines made when they left. There are no monitoring stations left in the basin. My 30 years of instruments, destroyed in minutes. I will not replace them. The basin is not a geological formation anymore. It is a scar on the body of a planet that wronged the wrong species, and scars do not need to be monitored. They need to be remembered. The sky above the crater is clear, and empty for now.